All right, welcome to this week's live office hours. We got a lot to cover, luckily. Um, we got May. It's finally May. Wow, how did that happen? Literally on a random Wednesday, we're in May. But it's exciting because we'll be attending the Proven Conference in Orlando as a team. We're sponsoring that. We'll also be at AMZ United in August in New Jersey. So that'll be fun. So we're sponsoring that as well. Luckily, we'll be one of the speakers too at AMZ United. So I get to be incredibly anxious up on stage talking to hundreds of people, which will be fun. Haven't done that in a hot minute. I've gotten really used to speaking like this to like thousands. In person, so different. And they're like, yeah, there were like 700 people there last year. I was like, awesome. It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it'll be good.
It's always a little different when everyone's in person and you actually have the physical eyeballs looking at you, but no, you'll be good. You'll come up with some topics. And if anybody has topics, things they want us to cover, things that are top of mind, obviously let us know and we can tailor some content around that. But yeah, it's been a quick beginning to the year. I feel like it was just February yesterday and now here we are in May and looking at summer. So yeah, it's been flying by for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. We're kind of in that phase of the year where things start to speed up quite a bit. I feel like Q1 tends to feel very, very slow, but we're quickly getting closer to Q4. So basically, it's either Q1 or Q4 in our world, which is super exciting. So one thing I did want to cover to kind of get the ball rolling here is one of our recent blog posts. Let me get this guy pulled up here. So I've noticed there's a lot of trends. I've spent a decade plus in the Amazon seller space. So I've noticed some trends. One of the first ones, funny enough, is outsourcing too early. I know this sounds counterintuitive because a lot of what's recommended is like scale your time and outsource. And like, yes, totally. But like people don't understand the nuances of this piece of advice because there are things like managing PPC ads. Yeah, you should outsource that. Should you become an expert in that to then outsource it? I don't think you necessarily have to because there are people who dedicate their entire lives to doing that one thing. Like that's a whole skill, right? And yes, sourcing is a good skill and is, I would say, a skill. The problem with it though is like there's no easy way to go learn that. And so what's so funny is because it's the critical piece of running an Amazon business, people go, well, I'm struggling with it, so I'm just going to outsource it to VAs. And when it ultimately doesn't go well, they go, well, what's wrong? How do I fix it? Well, you don't know how to do it to begin with, let alone fix it when it becomes a problem. And so I think a lot of sellers are far too eager to outsource things that they really shouldn't be outsourcing. They should be learning well enough to train somebody to go and do it. It's kind of like if I'm going to go coach baseball, but I'm not really good at baseball and don't really understand the dynamics of baseball, that's not going to go well. Like we're not going to win, like straight up. Right. Now, if I already understand the nuances and all that good stuff, like you don't have to be a great player to be a great coach kind of thing, but you still got to understand the game. And I think enough sellers are not trying to, be patient enough to understand the game to really get in here and do well. So I think that's the first one. And another one is just not networking. Like sellers just, it's starting to change a lot, which gets me so hyped and so excited because, when I was a seller, you kept everything secretive. You didn't share anything. You didn't even want people to know your name half the time. And now it's funny because actually now we're in the Discord world, so nobody knows each other's names anyways. But people are just like, hey, let's jump onto a Zoom call for 4 hours and source together and share everything. Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Like you could probably scale faster doing that than hiring a VA right now. Because you got 4 people parallelizing sourcing and you're like, you're going to do Kohl's, you're going to do Vitacost, blah, blah, blah. And you just share the bolos. Come on. That's huge, man. You just 4X your stuff. That's great. And then data-driven decisions. Funny enough, this one drives me insane. Because mainly because like I am this person, I've not always been the most data-driven person. I'm like, no, that feels right. It's like, that doesn't really work. Sometimes intuition's great. Don't get me wrong. But when you have data to make a decision, you should lean on that. And I've said this for years, sellers are drowning in wonderful, useful data. They're just not utilizing it well enough. And, I give like a brief example in here, hold on, wrong click. If you know what your best or worst categories are, that's even by itself helpful enough to be able to say, cool, like I really consistently lose money in tools. Awesome. Stop buying tools. Like, or maybe you need to spend more time to analyze those products better. Right. Again, it's just it's points of data to get you to think differently, to make better decisions, whether that's I'm struggling to source in this one category. I need to figure that out. Great, go do that. Or that category just sucks. I shouldn't do that. Great, go do that. Or what's your most profitable categories? Maybe you should consider running PPC ads, super low cost, just to that category, because the other categories don't really make sense from a profit perspective. And these are simple things to find and answer. But a lot of sellers don't really do that. You know, even with your virtual assistants, who are the most efficient? Who are the most profitable sourcing of your team? Can you take that person? Can you stack rank them and say, okay, I'm going to take my best person and I'm going to have them train for 4 hours a week. My worst person, did that worst person get better? Great. Maybe you should be taking that person and having them train the rest of your team. You know, it's things like that. Like you have to look at the entire business, look at what's true. Where do you want to go? And then utilize that information to close the gap. But just a few things I wanted to highlight here.
Yeah, and I think it is exciting, like you mentioned, Dylan, seeing it become a much more collaborative space, because a lot of times it's one of those things where if you're just getting started, you don't know what you don't know. So being able to lean on folks, whether it's other new sellers learning the same lessons or more experienced sellers who are teaching you those lessons, that's a great place to kind of get started. And then that can also bleed into making data-driven decisions. Like, I think we talked about it a lot in Q1, where people were people kind of asking or reviewing their Q4 performance. That's a kind of a slower time, like we mentioned. So it's a good time to look at what went well, what didn't go well in Q4. But if it was your first Q4 last year, you haven't been through a Q4, you don't know what data to look at and how to slice and dice it to make those decisions. So I specifically think like those 2 points overlap very well, where it's like you need to make data-driven decisions. And if you're not sure what data to look at, lean on the community or lean on a group or friends in the space to figure out like, hey, how do you guys analyze sourcing or performance in categories, and then making those educated decisions and informed decisions moving forward. And part of that, like if you don't know it, don't just outsource it, because they might not know it either. So then
they most likely don't know it. They probably know it less than you know it.
Right, exactly. And then that can put yourself in a hole where you are trying to fix things and you don't know how to do it in the first place. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend leaning on communities. Now it has become such a collaborative space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like the friction of joining these communities has changed a lot too. Like Discord seems a lot more open than Facebook groups used to be. Facebook groups were very cliquey in a lot of ways. So being a newcomer was kind of difficult. If you came in guns blazing, it was totally fine. But there's still, you know, your core group and I'm sure this is true for Discord to a certain degree, but every Facebook group had its own kind of culture. Right. But I feel like the Discord culture takes more of a precedent than the specific group's culture, if that makes sense, right? There's almost like this assumed culture coming in, where Facebook, it was anybody and everybody. It was just a different world. And so it's kind of nice, because I feel like people are building real relationships to be comfortable enough to share what they're learning, more so than feeling like somebody's going to steal something. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot more trust being built, a lot more of the actual networking stuff, you know, providing value, throwing things in. And what's cool is like, you're seeing people just getting started. They're like 30 days into being a seller and they're already creating content and just been like, here's just what I'm learning. I'm not like a guru. I'm just sharing what I learned and like how I messed up, pat myself on the back. And like, that's awesome. That's so important, because a lot of sellers would wait for years to even be like, I have a question. It's like, no, you should be asking these things day zero. So it does feel like the friction of being able to actually jump into these groups and contribute and all that good stuff is far lower than what it used to be, which is awesome. So definitely gets me excited. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Walt has a question. Last time I spoke with someone there, I was told that Aura is mainly set up for FBA. I am 95% merchant fulfilled. Am I able to use your service now? If so, how do I set it up? Yes. So you can use Aura for merchant fulfilled, whether that's rule-based strategies or Maven, doesn't really matter. You will have to, if you're going the rule-based route, you'll have to create strategies that make sense for merchant fulfilled. So I would reach out to our support team and say, hey, here's kind of what I'm looking at. Can you guys help me out? So hard to cover on this conversation because it really depends on like a lot of details from you, which I don't want to share publicly. But based on that, Casey, anything you want to add on, any like best practices, top of mind things?
Yeah, well, if you are looking to get started being an FBM seller, like Dylan mentioned, Maven, our AI strategy, will work effectively for you. But specifically on the rules-based side, if you don't want to compete with FBA sellers, you can use the competition type lowest FBM offer and price just against other folks that are FBM. That's going to be effective. And then the only other piece is being an FBM seller when you're setting up your costs. Or it does not automatically factor in your shipping costs. So if there's any shipping or prep fees that you take on to sell a listing, you'll just want to make sure those are added into the cost field so that Aura can use those and properly calculating, metrics, revenue, profit, and things like that. But also if you want Aura to automatically set your min and max prices, you want to make sure those costs are accurate.
Yeah. Nice. Let's see another question here. Would you recommend to have a VA if I'm a new FBA seller? What would be a good strategy to learn and scale fast? Yeah. So I think, again, depending on what you mean by VA, right? Because a VA is a very broad term thing. And what a lot of people mean when they say VA is a sourcing virtual assistant. I don't think you need that being a brand new seller because you're still learning the ropes. Now, getting a virtual assistant in the sense of like an administrative assistant that's helping you on very specific tasks that are easy to delegate to free up more time, I don't think that's a problem. However, you do need to factor in like there is a cost of your time and capital in hiring somebody. And so like, James and I didn't hire anybody for a few years because we could do everything and we were scaling pretty fast. So Dan Martell has a good book on this called Buy Back Your Time that I really do like his kind of philosophy in terms of how he recommends doing this. He talked about getting like an assistant first and they're going to handle like your calendar, your inbox, things like that. For a regular founder, I think that makes a ton of sense. For your average Amazon seller, your calendar is not really a variable. Like you just work whenever, like you're not dealing with a bunch of meetings. And your inbox is less of a priority than it is for like a regular tech founder. So like there is some subtleties there to be aware of that I don't really think are as applicable to sellers, but I do like the way he approaches it because it gives you a good frame of mind for like, okay, cool. Let's take this lower level stuff, hand that off so I can refocus more of my time on the most impactful things. Let's rinse and repeat and keep going up the stack. So I wouldn't hand over things like sourcing. What I might do is hand over smaller, less risky things to free up more of my time to focus on sourcing. And then getting really good at it. And then eventually, yeah, you're great at sourcing. You got to figure it out. Now you can hire somebody to come on, watch over your shoulder, learn how to do it, and eventually slowly take that over. And then it comes down to, well, where do you spend your time then? Well, it's probably building out your team, operations, finances, all that good stuff. So I really just don't recommend that you do that too soon. It's kind of like, with software companies, they raise, $20 million and hire a team of 80. It's like, dude, you don't even have a customer. Like, what are we doing here? Like, yeah, we can build crazy fast. Yeah, but build what? Right? It doesn't really work. So you kind of have to be very considerate of how you're approaching that, if that makes sense. See another follow-up here that I think is really good. Can you also explain a little bit more about the profit floor option when setting a strategy, please? Casey, you want to hit that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're setting up a strategy and you want to have a profit floor, typically we recommend setting your min prices automatically using ROI or profit margin. But if you have products that are low cost and sell at a lower price, sometimes that ROI, let's say 20%, that would be only $1.50 profit in your pocket. So in that example, you can set a profit floor and make it $2. So even if your min price is that 20% ROI, Aura is not going to price you below that profit margin of $2. So if your min price does fall below a specific margin or profit margin threshold, you can kind of implement a profit floor as a safeguard so that, hey, no matter what the situation is, I'm never going to get more than $3 profit or $5 profit, whatever threshold you determine there. Hopefully that makes sense, but kind of a safeguard to make sure you get at least that figure in profit on a sale.
Yeah. The way I tend to recommend utilizing that is not just for everything. It's really for your costs where it's like less than $10 is like probably a good example here. Your ROI, let's say you're doing 30% ROI, that makes sense on the average kind of product. But once you get really low by cost that obviously is a percentage. So it becomes not a lot at all. And so it kind of creates it as a safeguard here. This is really useful for used media where we have a lot of sellers that are like, cool, like I can sell for, 50% ROI all day long, but 50% on something that I paid $2 for isn't really worth it. So I want to make sure I'm making at least $5, whichever is greater. So that's really designed for really low cost items, in my opinion. Although, of course, you can certainly apply it to everything. But where I think it really shines is your lower cost products. Again, that sub $10 product. It tends to work really well there and just safeguarding profitability. Let's see here. Walt, to avoid having to put the shipping cost into 1,700 ASINs, is there a way to use a percentage against my current selling price? Not based on your current selling price. What I would probably recommend here, Walt, is probably going the Google Sheets Excel route. So I would actually do it. If you go to the uploads page, you can do a pre-fill template, and then you could do the math in there. That way it's still at scale. You'll still have to do it for all of them, but you could do it using Excel formulas. So it's going to make it super fast. Our team's also very much willing to help with these things. So if you can tell us exactly what you're trying to accomplish, we're more than willing to jump in Excel, do that for you, and then upload that for you. Not everybody's as geeked about Excel as we are, but there's a few of us that are finance majors, so we don't mind Excel at all. But yeah, if you do want to do that at scale, just reach out to support and just let us know exactly what you're trying to do, and we can help with that. And anything you want to add on to that, Casey?
That was going to be my recommendation. I always recommend the uploads to kind of make bulk changes, make sure costs or min-max prices are accurate. The other thing, Walt, would be if you're not concerned about having your costs being accurate and you just want to make sure you don't sell below a certain threshold, you could have your min prices automatically calculated and just up that minimum ROI percentage or margin. So if you know that your cost on an item's $10, but that shipping's $250, then kind of upping that percentage. So whatever that would be, like another 20% of whatever that cost is. You can always factor that in automatically, but then your reporting would be slightly off. So I do recommend Dylan's method using Excel for an upload, but you could always just up that minimum ROI percentage to factor in for that shipping cost without actually making those edits or changes.
Yeah, that's actually a really good recommendation there to stop you from having to do them all manually. So yeah, definitely consider. I would probably honestly recommend going Casey's route to begin with, and if you're like, it's still like not perfect, I want to make it perfect, then we can go the uploads route. So awesome, glad we were able to solve that for you. It's a good one. I like the more operational logistics stuff.
Yeah. And especially with that uploads one, you can do the percentage method that I mentioned, Walt. And then if you find like, hey, it works great for 90% of my listings, but the last 10% need a little bit of a change, you can then edit those individually or set manual mins on those listings. So that'll probably be the quickest way to do it. But yeah, I agree. Helping folks get set up. There's been a lot of conversations around that in chat recently. So yeah, just it's always exciting to get people up and running and repricing quickly and effectively.
Yeah, which kind of leads into some of the integrations we've been rolling out, right? So we launched Scan Power integration last week. We launched the Restock Pro by Ecom Engine. Actually just wrapped up a webinar with their team and their users. So trying to make it even simpler for a lot of people to kind of either get migrated or just get up and running and having far less work to get done. So like transferring over those costs, things like that. Listen, if software can do it for you, I'd rather software do it than you have to do it manually. So that's why we're pushing pretty hard on integrations lately, because I want to have one, just more options for sellers to be able to choose what works best for them. And two, every integration is slightly different in what you can and can't do. And so being able to kind of stack rank those for each individual seller and say, okay, for me as the user, here's what I need. I'm going to go that route. We're all good here. That lets you save so much time. And it's not just, importing costs, like, with Scan Power, we're importing mins and maxes now as well. And you can configure, which of those three you like to. It could be all three, 1, 2, doesn't matter. Again, just allowing you to kind of customize how you operate and then just saying, you do that for me. I think that's super, super key. Let's see. Can Aura help with suppressed buy boxes? Is there a specific strategy that I can use to do it? Casey, you want to hit this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So between our rules-based and Maven strategies, both have the option to try to unsuppress the buy box for you. In Maven, it is just a setting under, I can't remember if it's advanced or settings within that strategy builder, but just a checkbox. So you can check that. For rules-based strategies, it's going to be under the pursuit section for strategies that are targeting only the buy box. And that's going to show as when the buy box is suppressed, do this. It will typically be defaultly set to customize current price minus 2 cents. In that scenario, or I was going to slowly drop your price by 2 cents incrementally over time until the buy box is reactivated or until your min price is reached. And if it is in the Maven strategy, it will perform similarly, kind of slowly dropping that price until it's reactivated or your min price is reached. So yeah, as Dylan's showing us here under that pursuit section, it's going to be right there. And that is typically our recommended settings for trying to unsuppress that buy box. So you'll either end up at your min price or that buy box will be reactivated. And in Maven, I believe it is, yep, there under the advanced section. So if that's checked, it'll kind of work towards your min slowly. And then if that buy box does become active in that pricing action, then it'll resume repricing based on the strategy settings, whether that's your specific settings in rules based or Maven's logic as a whole.
Yeah. So what's nice is we kind of default to doing that. There are examples where, or exceptions, should I say, where it's not really worth, unsuppressing it. There are times where you're still getting plenty of sales at a much higher price and the buy box is suppressed, and that's okay. But 9 times out of 10, you want to unsuppress it. So by default, Maven rule-based strategies tend to default to these kind of settings so that, again, you don't have to really worry about it. We try to build things so that you don't really have to be an expert and get it perfect. We try to default to the best, most recommended things. And then if you need to change things for specific scenarios, you can do that yourself. See, Michael, kind of going back to the spreadsheet here. Could you do a spreadsheet that would add shipping per pound cost also? I could reach out to the support team for both prep cost and shipping costs, so it would be updated quicker. So you could do that. We don't return the weight. So you'd have to get that. So basically what you would need is your weight, all your costs, and then you would combine that and add it to your Aura upload. So you could do it. It's just going to be a little bit more complex than one spreadsheet. But if you have that data, feel free to send it over to us. We're happy to take a look and see if we can manipulate it for you and get you exactly what you want. But I would need, obviously, the variables for the equation. So I need to know what your prep, per poundage, if that's how you're wanting to do it, for every single one of your SKUs, how many poundage, how many pounds is each one, and then we can do that and then add it to the costs. Now, the thing that you're going to run into, Michael, potentially, if you're using the integrations, we will override that. So if you manually add your costs, we will override that because it's chosen in the settings to sync it. So just keep that in mind. You kind of can't do both. We're not in a world yet where we can do that very well. It's kind of a harder challenge to overcome. So depending on if you're utilizing and relying upon one of the integrations, you may or may not want to go this route in hindsight. But again, reach out to support. That way we can ask you these very detailed questions. Where are you at? What are you trying to do? What are all the details and variables at play? Then we can give a better recommendation for exactly what we think you should do. That's going to be really less time consuming and more accurate. But Casey, anything you want to add on to that?
The only other thing there, Mike, would be if you have a typical range of shipping costs, regardless of that cost per pound. We typically have a lot of sellers who have a given range for their FBM shipping or prep fees. And we usually just recommend leaning towards the higher end of that scale. Obviously, that won't make those costs perfectly accurate, but it will protect your margins so you don't price or make them too thin, if you will. So that's typically what I recommend to folks. If you know that shipping cost is usually between $2 and $4, just maybe make it $3.50 or $4. So then you don't have to worry about constantly updating it so it's exact, and you are still covered on the profit and revenue side there.
Yeah, and in an ideal world, raising your min prices shouldn't hold back performance because you should be buying with enough margin to play within anyways. So like Casey's saying, being able to just protect a little bit more of that downside just in case, but that should be the exceptions. You should be able to raise that up a bit and not have any negative detriments to your performance there. Let's see, Walt, should I just send an email to support to set up a call. I've been a subscriber for almost a year and haven't been able to upload the shipping calls. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to do an onboarding session, or we can dive deep into just this. So yeah, definitely reach out, Walt, to the support team via live chat. Just be like, hey, can I schedule time to be able to walk through this and see if you guys can help on that? Be more than happy to. You'll either talk with Finn or Casey or myself. But yeah, we would definitely be happy to do that. So it's nice. We're able to do that. Sometimes it's just easy to be like, just jump onto a call real quick. So it's funny when people say we offer 24/7 support. No, you don't. Your response rate is 8 hours. That's not 24/7 support. That just means you're saying I can email you at any time of day, which is true for any service. You know what I mean? Doesn't actually account to much. It's just kind of funny, these counterintuitive marketing things where it's like we have 24/7 support. It's like, yeah, but when we break it down to reality, it's actually not better. Like it's actually worse.
Right. Yeah, you're still not going to get a response for 4 or 5 or 6 hours anyway, right. Where at least with us, you get that response within 10 minutes during business hours and first thing in the morning during the week. So yeah, I totally agree.
There's at least consistent expectations. Yeah, I feel like we are actually faster than 24/7 just based on like how it works out. It's actually really funny.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I helped a couple different customers with issues that they were having on the Amazon end. Like I had one user help them with just a few different problems, and they're like, "Hey, thanks. You helped me with all of these problems before I even got one response from Amazon. So you guys are on top of it." Yeah.
Oh, imagine that. I know they're at a much larger scale than we are, but I imagine we could scale up what we do pretty well. Might be naive, but I'm confident. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, we know at least Amazon has the funds to do it better if they wanted to. So
right. Yeah, they have a little bit more money than we do. That's for sure.
Just a little bit.
See another question here. Once I set up a strategy, is it recommended to set the min price, or that option is just to make sure my price doesn't go below? Casey, you want to hit that?
Yeah, so min prices are required on Aura in order for repricing to be active. So you will want to set those min prices, whether manually or automatically, based on your costs. The things that are required in order for Aura to reprice a listing is going to be that min price, an assigned strategy, and then for repricing to be enabled. Repricing does have to be enabled on both your marketplace under the marketplaces tab and then the individual listing itself. If you don't have the marketplace active for repricing, then you won't be able to activate the individual listings. So those are the 3 requirements in order for Aura to issue any pricing updates and changes. So yeah, and reason for that, the min price being required, we want to make sure that your price doesn't go low either. So that's going to be a cement or hard floor, if you will, for pricing actions. So yeah, you'll definitely want to set those whether manually or automatically there.
Yeah, we do require that because from a technical perspective, if it's nothing, if it's left blank, technically it's 0, and that's just not a good idea for us to follow. So we decided early on, we're not going to allow that because that just puts everybody into a bad position, and we would just rather not reprice than put you into a potentially negative position. So super important, very critical. We have a few kind of safety nets built in, if you will. Which is funny because one of the safety nets we actually removed because there's a better alternative we designed. So the legacy version of this was called the 3-hour trigger system, which basically meant that if there were 3 hours of consecutive time that went by and there's no organic price changes, we would force your price up 1 penny and down 1 penny. Worked pretty well. The problem though is that we were just trying to get information, right? We're doing that to get information like price changes, all that good stuff from Amazon. And we realized when we were rebuilding Aura that it wasn't really as efficient. And so what we designed was what we now call the replay system. So we actually store that information instead of having to get it every single time. We just store the most recent one. That way we can replay any setting changes, strategy changes, anything like that immediately instead of having to wait for that next organic price change. So the 3-hour trigger was something that kind of in hindsight was more of a band-aid to some of the things we were seeing, but now it's like actually we're able to solve the root problem here, which is even better. Because on average, organic price changes, every 15 minutes on average, but 15 minutes is pretty long. 3 minutes is 3 hours is pretty long. We can get that down dramatically better with 1.0 using that replay system. So a lot of foundational stuff we made changes on with 1.0.
Yeah, and that's especially helpful if you make changes to your listing or specifically your strategies where it applies to multiple listings at once. Having those changes become effective immediately, whether it's, hey, adjusting my min price, or I want to reprice down or above by a certain margin or change that margin. So, yeah, the replay system definitely works extremely well.
Yeah. Yep. See Michael here. Thanks. I'll have to reach out to you guys because I use Seller Amp, and you can export fees, costs, or taxes into a Google Sheet using their tool. And then maybe the spreadsheet you guys create can use /sync that data to get the accurate numbers I'm looking for. Yeah, I think we'll be able to do that. Once we can see the data, we'll definitely let you know if we're able to do it or not. We like doing this kind of stuff because it's fun and it helps you out. So yeah, definitely send if you can. Once you get all those exports, you don't have to worry about the Aura export. We'll do that on our end. But if you can get all the external software, Seller Amp, all that good stuff, export it, send it to us in chat. You can attach it there and just let us know, hey, here's kind of what I'm trying to achieve here. We can start to work on that. Just give us a little bit of time, but happy to do so. See here, and keep those questions coming. This is fantastic. This is a good session here. Again, this is open office hours, so there's no hard set kind of rules here. We're just available to answer questions that anybody has. So whether that's or repricing related, just repricing as a concept, specific features, we could deep dive on anything like that, or even just things about being a seller, right? We can just vent about fees for 45 minutes if you like. I'm just kidding. We already do that anyways. So keep those questions coming. And any feedback you have for us on Aura, the product, the team, we would love to see and hear that as well. We love that kind of stuff. Nice. Yeah, but I'm pretty pumped about Proven Conference. This is going to be fun. I kind of crashed the Miami Seller Conference. Relatively small group. I think it was like 200-ish people. I think Proven's supposed to be much larger. So that's going to be pretty awesome and insane, just knowing how fast I lost my voice for 200 people. I can only imagine if it's like 500-700 people. So I will start preloading on honey and cough drops now, like a whole month before.
Yeah, all the herbal teas and everything. Yeah,
it's gonna be fun. See, Michael, geek out on any new AI talk since last week. A little bit. It's in my other room here, so I won't go to grab it. But I was able to finally receive the Rabbit R1. This is the case, which doesn't help you at all. But so playing around with some AI hardware stuff. Still early days. Definitely not perfect. I don't know. I'm spending a lot more of my free time looking at things like frameworks. So building like crews or like agents, like agentic AI, right? So how do you put multiple agents together into what like Crew AI is, like the framework I've been geeking out with. I demoed this to the team on our Lunch and Learn, I think last week. But how can you basically build this collection of intelligent agents that work together kind of autonomously to achieve a goal? It's definitely early days. It's really interesting. Sometimes it's frustrating because there's things I just want to be able to do that just don't work. So right now we're in that phase of a lot of innovating. Sorry, I keep hitting the mic here. A lot of innovating software companies raising good money, trying new things. They're just not quite there yet. And so the promise is a little far-fetched relative to reality, but they're close enough to still make it interesting. Right. So it's like close enough to be interesting, far enough to be frustrating, because you can't do the thing that they're like, you can do this. And it's like, no, I can't. But like, I see the path to get there and we will get there. But this is, people are saying we've hit AGI 6 months ago, which I disagree. But, so it's all about perspective. What is still possible right now is absolutely incredible. But, I was messing around with a new tool called Howie. I think it's Howie.ai. Basically, it's like a AI scheduler for your email. So you just CC Howie. It reads the entire thread. It goes, oh, cool. You wanted something on Tuesday. I'll send my Tuesday. It connects to your calendar. So you can say, hey, find us a time on Tuesday. And I go, cool. Like, here's the times. The person will respond back. But yeah, Tuesday at 9 a.m. sounds good. It goes, cool, and schedules it. Like, that's really cool. It reminded me of a tool I tested back in the day called Clara Labs. They actually used humans on the back end to kind of assist. So it wasn't full AI, but they kind of just vanished. I don't know what the hell is happening to them. Great product, really cool, but it's like $100, but Howie's like 15. per month. But still early days, the first 2 examples it broke. So I was like, oh, cool. Like, I'm going to send the logs to the developers so they can help fix it. And they were able to find bugs, and that's great. But like, I kind of don't want bugs anymore. I kind of just want it to work. You know what I mean? Like, I'm getting sick of watching Star Trek episodes because I'm that dork who does that once a week. And I'm like, oh, we're like, we could do that. I'm like, yeah, we could do like 40% of that right now. We're not quite there yet. We're really close. But yeah, it's both exciting and frustrating at the same time. Like the Rabbit R1s got me really excited. I pre-ordered it because of the large action model, and it's rabbit.tech is their site if you want to check it out. Their whole thing was you can basically train their model on your computer on how to use software and then use this piece of hardware anywhere and say, hey, do that thing. And it goes, cool, I can do it on the server. That's really cool. That's actually awesome. Like the first thing I wanted to do was train it how to use Aura. I want to be able to say, hey, enable hyperdrive for all my Nike stuff. And it goes, cool, I can go do that. And it just does it. Like, that's really awesome. But then at the release day, they're like, yeah, you can do that with like 4 things, but like, it's going to take longer for us to allow you to train it yourself. I was like, well, that kind of sucks, because day 0, all I wanted to do was hook it up with Aura, and I can't. So I'm like, oh, it's cool. It's definitely neat. But it feels more early stage novel geek than super practical, which is frustrating. So a lot of the stuff is borderline practical. That's what I'm. Yeah. Oh, I like that. Borderline practical. I like that. Just start a tech podcast called Borderline Practical. That's actually kind of cool. Do you guys prefer Apple or Windows? We are Apple fanboys. Straight. Somebody, they get a brand new MacBook Pro. Huge fan. Hence why Aura looks the way it does. We use a lot of inspiration from Apple. So
yeah, I've always been an Apple guy myself. The iPod Classic was a revelation when I was in middle school. It's because being a big movie guy, I was like, I can download movies onto my iPod for flights and stuff. Yeah,
and watch it like this big.
Yeah, on the tiny little screen.
Which was still cool. Yeah, it was still cool.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
It's funny. I was a hardcore PC Android guy because you could tweak it and customize it and hack it. And I got my first Mac. I was like, oh, this is wonderful.
Yeah.
Never going back, and went full Apple fanboy.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Let's see. Question here. I started with groceries, and I heard that with Aura, I can increase my sales. I am having trouble in setting a strategy because my lack of expertise. Which strategy option would you recommend me to set in order to sell fast and maybe with 25 to 30% ROI? So I would actually recommend defaulting and starting with Maven, the AI model. That's going to, especially being new, it gives you the best performance without requiring you to understand and set perfectly everything. Rules-based really requires you to understand kind of what you're doing to a certain degree. Although, again, if you haven't done an onboarding session, please reach out to support via chat and request that. It's like 20 minutes. It's not super long. We really walk you through A to Z. We really answer all the questions you have. So if you want to dive deeper and understand those things, we can definitely do that with you. But in the meantime, I would highly recommend Maven because it's designed to abstract away, to remove away the complexities of repricing and still give you better performance. So it really doesn't matter what category you're in. It's really by default, I would say, go with that. And then rule-based is really for handling the exceptions, right? On things where, no strategy, no model is going to be perfect. And so we allow you to go in and say, cool, well, for this particular listings, Maven's not doing the best. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and create a specific strategy to handle this exact case. And we'll be fine. That's pretty much what I would recommend in case if you have any follow-ups on that.
Yeah, I would recommend the same. It does take Maven just a little bit. I would say maybe like a day or 2 max for it to kind of become intelligent on the listings before it settles into the pricing range that it determines is best. Once you kind of get through that initial learning curve phase for Maven, if you will, then it will become highly effective and you'll begin to see sales in and around or in and above the buy box. But just like Dylan said, if you do see some listings where Maven isn't quite as effective on, that's where I would recommend going rules-based, and the buy box targeting strategy is probably going to be best for sales velocity in that case. Setting up the rules-based strategies, or specifically the buy box targeting strategy is pre-configured with our most recommended settings for winning that buy box. So then you would just have to worry about the min max price section, setting it to, like you said, either that 25 or 30% ROI figure. But yeah, I would definitely recommend starting with Maven and then adjusting accordingly.
Yeah. So one of the upsides of how we're kind of viewing things moving forward, it's like, can we rely more on tech, more on AI, these models to handle a lot more of the complexities for us instead of like having to go heavy on, like we still want to do heavy education, of course, but like I don't want every one of our users to have to be like a professional repricing expert to do well. Like actually you should be able to jump in and understand nothing and still crush it. Like that's the ideal state, right? Like you got enough on your plate anyways. You're already busy. Let's see, Doug, if I'm sending the same ASIN in multiple times, would you recommend creating a new SKU each time so I can set different strategies for older and newer inventory? It kind of depends. So it depends on how frequently your costs change. So, and if you're using an integration. So if you're using an integration like ScanPower, Restock Pro, and you're batching those costs, so you're saying, cool, like this batch is going to be, cost A, this batch is going to be cost B. We'll take we'll basically take the average or the last one, depending on what settings you set in your integration settings. So we can kind of handle the cost adjustment side of things very well. If the point of the question is more related to kind of FIFO, so like being able to move inventory faster as it's getting older and then assess down. I would consider multiple SKUs. I'm trying to think if there's a better alternative here, because we do let you see like the age of inventory, all that good stuff. But there's no automatic way for you to go in and say, cool, like if it's greater than this right now, become aggressive. And then after it goes back down, become less aggressive again. These are things we're looking at internally. We just haven't shipped yet. We're still in the testing phase on a lot of this stuff. But I want to say like for now, I would probably recommend having multiple SKUs on that ASIN, because we look at the SKU level, it's still going to create some more manual work for you in your Aura account, like managing like when to become more aggressive and stuff like that. That's my only hesitation in making this recommendation is like I always err on the side of simplicity. And so it could make a lot of sense and be worth the effort, or it could be too much effort and not really high enough ROI, in which case you could have just kept it all under one SKU and then just watched it and change your strategy. Yeah, I'm kind of going to go back on myself here. I would probably recommend using one SKU, watch the age of inventory. As it goes up, you might consider basically just changing your strategy to a more aggressive one. As the age of inventory comes back down, just switch back over to the more conservative one. That's probably going to be far less work for you, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. But Casey, any follow-ups on that?
Yeah, that's probably what I would recommend. And Doug, I'm not obviously as familiar with your specific setup, but we do have folks that manage multiple marketplaces within Aura. If those ASINs or SKUs don't belong to the same marketplace, Aura would look at that as separate competition, and you could end up repricing against yourself in that scenario. If they are in the same marketplace, then Aura does recognize that and you won't reprice against yourself. But if you were in the scenario, multiple marketplaces, each having those same SKUs or ASINs, you obviously want to avoid repricing against yourself. So yeah, I would agree with Dylan. That manual work may not be worth the lift there. So keeping things simpler and then adjusting as that age of inventory goes up would be what I recommend on one single SKU there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a good general rule of thumb is go with the simpler option first. And then if that's not cutting it, then consider expanding, making it a little bit more complex, but ideally the simple, I'm hesitant to give advice that would create more work for somebody because you're already busy anyways. So it's like, sometimes it's worth giving up a little bit for so much saved time, but it just kind of depends. Nice. Yeah. Great question there, Doug. I'm trying to think if there's any other AI stuff. I've been out of commission for a day or so. I'm recovering from being sick, so I haven't been as plugged in as I'd like to be, but I don't think there's anything crazy new. I think the Open Interpreter is finally starting to manufacture their device, which is like the open source version of Rabbit R1, which is exciting. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Casey, any AI stuff on your front?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't use it as much in my day-to-day. I did recently ask it to build a diet and workout plan for me. I entered in like ChatGPT, I entered in like, this is my height and weight. This is my goal. give me a 7-day workout plan, a meal plan to go with it. It actually didn't do too bad. It spit out like 15 recipes that were different enough. I was like, I can kind of work with those.
Yeah.
And then, kind of looking at whatever recommended exercise. I'm not a big gym guy. I never have. I grew up playing sports, so I never worked out outside of that. So when naturally I stopped playing sports, I started to grow wide instead of tall. But yeah, it's been interesting. I've had it plan vacations in the past.
Nice.
But yeah, I'm trying to think cleverly about how to implement some ease of use AI stuff into my day to day, but still figuring that out.
Yeah. We every Thursday do a lunch and learn. So one random person on the team gets chosen. They can teach anything, 15, 30 minutes, nothing crazy. And we did prompt engineering. So actually showed, here's me just asking, do this task, in a normalish kind of way, the way you would just ask a person, and the result was horrible. I said, cool, here's a engineered prompt to get better results. And it was like night and day. So it's funny how, the whole prompt engineering is still very relevant if you're utilizing these tools. And funny enough, we cloned my voice using 11 Labs, and then had me speak in Greek, which was kind of cool. Didn't take very long, but even in that, right, I can change the prompt and be like, when I'm looking at my voice, I could say, oh, it's a curious person. Okay, cool. Like that will be different than an aggressive, annoyed human being. They're like, I funny enough talked like more aggressively and faster in the second prompt than the first one. And that's using my voice being cloned, which is just crazy. So lots of good stuff there. But yeah, I think you should be playing with this stuff. Again, I think we're on that cusp of it's becoming very practical. We're just not quite there yet. So the usability of these things are really difficult. Like, yeah, ChatGPT is relatively straightforward, but a lot of what people are doing are not just text generation. There's a lot more happening here. So like, when you look at ChatGPT as like an individual thing, it's really nice, but it's not necessarily replacing like agencies or VAs quite yet. I think your agents are going to get you closer to doing that. But again, we're just not at a point where it's reliable and easy to get up and running. So it's like a lot of coding, stuff like that. And it's still like relatively easier than it ever was, of course, like using these frameworks and stuff. Like I can do it, but there's still just so much there that we haven't solved, or questions we haven't answered yet, to get us over that hump where it's like, oh, cool. Like now it's actually useful. Even if it's not perfect, it's like dramatically useful. Like our Amazon agencies are basically like going to be extinct in like 90 days. We're not there yet. I think we will, but I hate not to be a doomsdayer, but like, that's just, listen, SEO, optimizing listings, all that stuff could easily be done with one person in a small group of AI agents. That's just a reality. Like if I had the time, I could do that. Would it be perfect? No, but it'd be pretty on point. So we could definitely do it, but just not there yet. Awesome. So we got about 10-ish minutes here, a little 12 actually. So keep those questions coming. Otherwise, I'm going to keep ranting on AI. Thanks, Michael, for asking me the question. I'll pull back on AI.
It's a good floodgate to open sometimes. Sometimes got to let the people know what's new and exciting out there.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, there's still some human element stuff. Like I forget what company I was chatting with via support, but I could tell it was AI, and it like missed a big key component of a message that I sent. And then I was like, hey, like would love to talk to a person. And then of course, hours later, I get an email like, hey, like, sorry about that. But yeah, I mean, in addition to them being able to take on more responsibilities and tasks and things like that, it is important to make sure that if you're using that stuff, to set it up effectively so then it doesn't create more work for you. Almost going back to the VA question to kind of start from the blog post, like if you don't teach your AI or set up your AI similarly to teaching a VA or setting up an AI or VA for success, then it's going to create more work. And that is not the end goal, of course.
Yeah, well, funny enough, there's a lot of push philosophically right now on the people who will get the most out of AI are people who are really good at delegating, because they're good at giving clear feedback, clear, decision criteria, success criteria, all these good things. And so when you see people jump in to ChatGPT and there's like write me a blog post on X and it's horrible. They're like, well, this is garbage. It's like, well, yeah, but like give that to a human without any context. That would also be true. Like if I took that to my 7-year-old and said, write me a blog post on this, it's like, what are you talking about? But if I could come up with like, a lengthier prompt to say like, here's how we define success. Here's the things I want to care about. Here's the tone, the language I want you to use. Like all of a sudden you get dramatically better outputs. And so, it's not the world of Tony Stark and Iron Man where it's like, do that thing. And it's like, boom, I know all the context and blah, 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 blah. Like that's so far out. But if it's do this thing and here's the exact, not necessarily step by step, but like, here's all the context you need to do that well, you're going to get dramatically better results. Whether that's AI agents, ChatGPT, it kind of doesn't matter. It's all the same kind of world to me. And so, even if you're using something like Julius.ai to, you can hook up like your data sets and ask it questions. You still have to ask good questions. You can't just be like, make me more money. And it's like, cool. Yeah, I can just do that. Let me just analyze all your data and be like, here's 5 ways. It's like, maybe, but it's not going to be that good. Let's be honest. Like you have to give it some constraints, some context here. Let's see. Benjamin, sorry, I came in late and have questions you might have answered when Walt asked them. In order to effectively use Maven AI, do you have the costs completed? Also, Walt's question about primarily merchant fulfilled very little FBA was recommended for strategy. So again, Maven you can utilize for FBA versus merchant fulfilled, not a problem at all. It's when you get down to like role-based strategies, like custom strategies where merchant fulfilled, you kind of have to build a different strategy for that versus FBA. But again, we recommend starting and defaulting to Maven first and foremost. And then if you're still having trouble with certain listings, we can help you kind of build strategies specific for it. Do you need costs? I would recommend cost because otherwise all your profitability data is going to be completely skewed. And ideally what's happening is, Maven only has one setting for it, which is your minimum values. How do you want to set that manually? All these good things, ROI, profit margin. I rarely recommend setting these manually because it creates a lot of work for you. And so instead, what I would recommend is you get your costs uploaded, either in integration, the uploads field, manually, whatever makes sense for you, whatever you can do. And then tell Maven, hey, I want to set my mins based on X% ROI. You do that because you might want to change that. 15% ROI might be suitable now, but getting into Q4, you might want to raise that to 25 to 30%. Instead of having to recalculate these manually, you just change the 15 to a 30, click save and move on with your life and you're all done. Everything's updating for you. We do require a minimum price to reprice period, either manually set or set by your strategy dynamically. So you have to have it set period. So I recommend setting it in a more automatic, scalable way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, everything Dylan just said, and then with the cost side of things and being FBM or MFN, then you'll just want to include those shipping costs into the cost field as well, so those are calculated or taken into account when min and max prices are calculated for you.
Yep. See, follow up here. What's the process after setting up a listing strategy, and can I maximize its effectiveness? And how can I maximize? Okay, so once you've created your strategies, you've assigned them to your listings, the listings you want to assign these strategies to. And once you've done that, ideally, again, if you're automatically calculating your min prices, we already have that. So we need a third thing. So Aura needs 3 things: a minimum price, either dynamically calculated based on your strategy or manually set by you; 2, the strategy assigned to it. So specifically, what strategy do you want to use? And number 3, repricing has to be toggled on for each listing. So once you've applied your strategy, you're just going to toggle on repricing. Just say, yep, I want you to reprice, and we're good to go. In terms of getting the most and maximizing the effectiveness, it really depends on what you're doing. So again, if you're using Maven, that's kind of set and forget for the most part. So I would still watch your listings. If you're going the custom rule-based strategy route, you really want to pay attention and kind of understand, well, how are things going? Is that a good thing? What settings do I need to tweak? And again, our team is very happy to help with this. So if you get up and running, you could say, hey, can you take a look at my account, see if I'm doing anything incorrect, wrong, or if there's anything that's odd that we can help fix, we're more than happy to do that. We do it all day. So it really won't take us super long to be able to jump in and kind of figure out what's happening and help make some corrections for you there. With Maven, it's a little bit more hands-off, right? Because there's not as many settings you're going to get in there and tweak and change yourself. It's that model approach. So you're not really getting in there and tweaking things. Although you may find, and this is counterintuitive, but your min values, so if you're setting, ROI, should actually be lower using Maven than if you're using role-based strategies. So, well, why is that? It sounds wrong, Dylan. You're telling me to lower my min prices. I am. But what's interesting is Maven's not designed to tank your prices like others. So it's actually going to find that optimal price. And most of the time, what you're seeing on socials even is like, we're getting sales above the buy box. So you don't have to worry about that tanking problem. But because it's a model, not just a strategy, giving it more range to do what it needs to actually increases performance. So if you're used to setting your minimums at, let's say, a 30% ROI using rule-based, I would consider going lower, like 20 to 15% ROI for Maven. It gives it more room to do what it needs to do that. So if you jump in, you're using Maven and you're like, oh, I'm not seeing, the performance I expected, look at your min prices first. That's the first thing we're going to look at as a team and say, hey, we need to consider lowering these because they could be too high. Again, that does not mean that you're going to have a lower margin or anything like that. It just means it's giving it more room to do its strategy and what it needs to get done. Casey, anything you want to add to that?
No, I would completely agree. It does seem counterintuitive to lower your mins for it to be more effective, but making sure it has a wide enough range to effectively test what is going to be the optimal price. It's almost like, this is a weird analogy that's coming to mind, but if a loon lands in a lake and the lake is not big enough, it cannot actually take back off because the runway is not big enough. So that's actually a problem in New Hampshire where I grew up. If loons land in lakes, they actually need to be wildlife people will come in and move them to a lake that has a long enough runway so it can take off and fly. So you want to make sure you have a long enough runway to find that optimal price. In that case, flight. Bizarre analogy, but that's what happens when
is this a bird or an aircraft?
A bird, a loon. Yeah,
it is a bird.
It looks like kind of looks like a goose, but it's sharper beak.
Okay, so it has no vertical takeoff.
Exactly. Yeah, it needs a minimum runway, and if it can't get that, then it just gets stuck in whatever body of water they land on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's just wild, but yeah.
Crazy. So follow up on this. How low would you lower your mins? It really depends. So again, I tend to start by cutting them in half first. So if you're setting at 30%, I would cut that down to 15, see if that increases performance. We have tested and we've seen plenty of users do this too. They set their mins at 0% ROI for Maven. I don't recommend doing this for role-based because I can't guarantee how it's going to perform because it depends on your settings. But for Maven, it doesn't mean we're going to push it down, which is so interesting because again, what we talked about, that optimal price, right? We're kind of getting prices or getting sales above the buy box. And so you can test that. I'm not saying you should. I'm not saying take all your, minimums to 0% ROI, but I do want to give confidence in the sense that doing so is not going to cause complete anarchy and chaos. But I don't think you need to do that. It's just, if you're sending them at 30, 45%, you could cut those in half and probably see better performance and better margins. Funny enough, I know it sounds weird, but you have to be thinking when we're talking about Mavens, the second and third order of what we're doing here. It's not just, we're reacting first order. So basically first order as in a competitor did this and I did that. That's first order. I look at second and third order, which is competitor did this, I did that to ensure they did this, to ensure I could do this. And that this at the end is a lot of times raising the price. So sometimes you got to go down to go up, right? It's kind of counterintuitive. But that's how I tend to think about it. So it's hard to say how low should you go because it just depends on every single seller. The lowest would be 0% ROI, and that's why I bring that up. See, same thing on costs. Costs, yeah, your costs are your costs, so don't change your costs. Get those as accurate as you can because you can't really manipulate those technically. And see, does Maven also help unsuppressed buy boxes? Yes. So by default, it does. You can turn this off in the Maven settings when you're creating it, when you're adding it. By default, we do this. And even on the role-based strategies, if you go to create a custom one, we actually default to unsuppressing buy boxes automatically. We think it's just a good behavior, a good habit to do so. Again, there's always exceptions. So what we try to do is design features and settings that by default are the best on average, but there's always exceptions and you need to kind of tweak things. So yes, we do automatically handle those for you. Yeah, great question. Awesome. Great session here. We're going to wrap up for time. Again, we do this every single Wednesday. I want to say Tuesday because the 2 p.m. Every single Wednesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. EST. So we'll see you again next week. Again, don't wait to ask us questions. Jump into support. Get help. We're always here, always available. So don't feel like you have to wait for next week. But we appreciate everybody making the time and jumping in. And with that, we'll let you get back to the rest of your week.
Have a good week, everyone.